Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books of all time. In my last quotes video, I talked about how I was going to be doing this series of videos that would be my top 10s. And so yeah, this is the first one. It is time for that series to begin. And that means it is also time for me to start doing a quote at the end of every video. I'm no longer doing dedicated quotes video, but I want to keep quotes as part of my channel, and so at the end of each video I will be doing one quote. But yeah, I'm super excited for this top 10 series to replace my previous quotes video series. And of course I had to do my top 10 favorite books for my first top 10 list. So, going from number 10 to number 1, let's get started. Number 10 is Kids of Appetite by David Arnold. This is probably the newest book on this top 10 list, which also could be why it's number 10. I do tend to have a lot of nostalgia and rate books more highly if they've been in my life for longer, which might not be very fair or accurate, but I just am a very nostalgic person. But yeah, I probably read this one for the first time in 2016 or 2017. It was an advanced reader copy of David Arnold's second book, Kids of Appetite, and immediately upon finishing it, I loved it so much that I went out and bought his first book, which I don't do very often. I'm not the type of person who has to read lots of books by the same author necessarily. But I loved this one so much that I was very excited to read more by him, and then it was such a disappointment. I really disliked his first book. I unhauled it immediately. But I did love Kids of Appetite so much, it immediately shot to the top of my favorites list, obviously. I really loved the writing style. It had such interesting, unique concepts. I really loved all the characters. This is sort of a found family. It is about this teenager whose dad has died, and at the beginning of the book his mom gets engaged and he sort of loses it a bit over that. He runs out of the house with his dad's urn and just sort of runs away, and when he looks in the urn he finds a letter from his dad asking his mom to spread his ashes in various places that are special to them, but it's sort of not really in code, it's just written in a way that only the mom would know what locations he's talking about. And so the kid is on a mission to spread the ashes, and he meets this other group of kids, none of whom are living at home. They're all just living together in this greenhouse, and they're sort of a found family, like I said, which is one of my favorite tropes. And yeah, they end up deciding to help our main character spread his father's ashes. And each of the kids in the book are such great characters. I really enjoy all of them so much. They're very interesting and unique and all very likable. So yes, highly recommend this book if you like contemporary YA with like a unique, quirky writing style and unique, quirky characters to go along with that style and the found family trope. Alright, number 9 on my list of my top 10 favorite books of all time is Tiger Lily by Jody Lynn Anderson. I love Peter Pan, but I most especially love Peter Pan retellings. And this one is my favorite. It's a little bit more adult than most Peter Pan retellings, and it of course focuses on Tiger Lily, and she is such a great, interesting character in this book. And it does a lot of really interesting things with the Peter Pan canon. But yeah, it's just like very moody and atmospheric, and definitely has a very distinct like feeling to it. It is told from the perspective of Tinkerbell, which I love. And yeah, it just has this like wild feeling to it that I like. So highly recommend if you are a fan of Peter Pan at all. Number 8 on my list of top 10 favorite books is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. This one is on my list for reasons that are very specific to me. For years, I've heard people say that reading various characters was like reading about themselves, and I had never had that feeling before reading this book. I've had some characters that I've had some similarities with, like Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, but never one quite like Kath from Fangirl. First of all, were like the big things, like our very, very similar personalities. I love how Rainbow Rowell writes about social anxiety and shyness in this book. I felt very seen. There were things that Kath does to deal with her shyness that are things that I do that I'd never read in a book before. And then of course there was our similar interests. We're both fangirls, obviously. Harry Potter was my favorite series growing up, and the fictional series that is in this book is very clearly modeled on Harry Potter. So there were those big like personality and similar interest things, but then there were also like the other like things just about our lives that were the same, which is that me and Kath are from the same place. We were both from Nebraska, and we both went to school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I actually read this in my fourth year of college, which was my second year at UNL. I started at a community college. So yeah, it was truly, truly like reading about myself. And I'd never really read a book where it's describing places that I know exactly what they look like. I don't have to make up things in my head. I can actually just picture them as they are. So that was an interesting thing that I had never gotten out of a book before. And then it was exciting because there were a lot of like very little details that were coincidental and kind of little connections to my life that were very weird. For example, one of the weirdest ones I can come up with is that she has a roommate named Reagan, and at this time I had a horse named Reagan, and this was like a chestnutty red sort of a horse, and so I just sort of automatically gave her roommate Reagan red hair in my mind. And then like 2 chapters later, the character Reagan is described as having red hair, which was just such a weird, huge coincidence that, and there were lots of those types of things like sprinkled throughout the book. And so just every time one of those would happen, it would just be like, ah, which was super fun to read and, you know, not so exciting now that I know about them. But the first time reading them, there were just so many of those throughout the book that it just each time was very surprising and weirdly exciting. So that kind of stuff definitely weighed heavily on me really enjoying this the first time I read it. But I do still definitely love it and have it kind of close to my heart because of those bigger similarities that are less coincidental, like our similar personalities and stuff. But obviously I also enjoyed the story itself, and I'm really just overall a big fan of Rainbow Rowell's writing style. Another thing that I had never experienced with a book before that I experienced with her books, more so attachments, Fangirl a little bit, but honestly attachments kind of, I had this feeling of like, I feel like I would be friends with this author if I met them in real life. Just some of the things that she writes about, I'm like, this writer is such a cool person. Which is, yeah, a feeling that I don't often think about the authors much, but with this one and more so attachments, I kind of did think like, I wonder about this author. I think they seem like they would be cool in real life. But yeah, definitely really shows that fan culture really well, and I feel like is a book that readers and fan people and writers as well can really connect with. So moving on to number 7 on my list of my top 10 favorite books, we have The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, which this is the only kind of adult novel on the list. It's the only historical fiction on the list. It still does have a little bit of, I guess, I don't know if you'd call it a fantasy twist, a non-realistic twist in that it is narrated by death, which is definitely one of my favorite things about the book. I love this one so much. Of historical fiction, ones that take place during World War II do tend to be what I gravitate towards, and this one is my favorite World War II historical fiction, obviously. Even just the first 15 pages, kind of the opening of the book, are so impactful. Sometimes I will literally just read the opening of the book if I'm kind of feeling in the mood for it but don't actually want to read the book, because it is just the best opening for a book that I think I've ever read. And then the last sentence of the book is so haunting. It really kind of brings it all together so well. And yeah, definitely just very heavy but heavy in a good way. And this is another one where I kind of went out and got his books. I went out and got his first book after reading this one, and it was okay, but I didn't love it. But I didn't unhaul it like I did with Kids of Appetite, the first book by David Arnold. But then I got his third book that he published after this, and that one I just did not enjoy it at all. It was so boring. I haven't unhauled it because it fits nicely on my shelf, but once that shelf starts getting full, it will probably be the first thing to be unhauled. But yeah, if you like historical fiction or even just are wanting to give it a try, I would highly recommend The Book Thief. Number 6 on my list is The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, which I actually just reread this last year, and I had so much fun rereading it. This is a childhood favorite for sure. If I had done this video like 10 years ago or whatever, this probably would have been in my top 3. But yeah, it's just one of the great fantasy series of my childhood. It's again got such great characters. I love how later in the books we get to go into multiple characters' perspectives and really flesh a lot of them out. I like how this one is high fantasy, but not too dense. Sometimes high fantasy can get quite dense, and this one definitely does not have that problem. It always stays pretty fast-paced and action-packed. So yeah, if you're looking for kind of faster-paced high fantasy, I would recommend The Inheritance Cycle. And now getting into the top 5, number 5 on my list is Princess Academy by Shannon Hale, which I really debated between Aragon and Princess Academy, which one would be number 5 and which one would be number 6. And I settled on this one for number 5, which might partially be because this is so much smaller and it's, for me, just the one book, so I get to reread it more often because it's less of a time commitment. And I say for me, it's just the one book because this is actually technically a series. I think the second and the third book didn't come out until much later though, and I certainly did not read the second and the third until I think I was in my 20s. I first read this probably at the age of 9 or 10. So for the longest time, this was one book for me, and the second book was such a huge disappointment that I got rid of it, did not read the third book, and in my mind, I choose to believe this is a standalone. And it does work as a standalone, and it is so good. Again, this is one that just has a certain feeling to it. It's so warm and cozy and really gives the feel of living on the mountaintop. Our main character lives on a mountaintop, and the lowlanders who don't live on the mountain have decreed that the next princess of the land is going to come from this mountaintop village where they live. And so all of the girls from this village are sent to an academy to learn to become princesses, just in case they are chosen. Oh, hello, Harry. Hi. But our main character, Muri, is so sweet and so wants to be useful to her village. She is very small for her age, and all of the villagers work in the quarry. Her dad will not let her work in the quarry, and she feels like no one believes in her or thinks she's strong enough to work in the quarry with everyone else. And it gives her kind of a lot of confidence issues throughout the book, but then she discovers this power that everyone in her village has, but because they all sort of take it for granted, they don't realize its true potential. And so it's just a really great journey to see the main character go on. And yeah, I always love rereading this and getting back into this world. It's sort of unlike any other book I've read. It's sort of got fantasy elements, but not a lot. And really, it's just very homey. So number 4 on my list is the Uglies series by Scott Westerfeld. This is my very favorite dystopian series. It is so action-packed, such an adventure, so fast-paced and fun. And I so wish that we had a movie for it. A movie adaptation has been announced, but there's not a lot of news about it yet, so I don't know, until I see a trailer or something, or posters or something, I'm maintaining just a little bit of skepticism just in case it doesn't actually happen. But when and if it does, I will be so excited. But yeah, this one is about a society that everyone has a surgery when they're 16 to make themselves supermodel gorgeous, and this just sort of makes everyone get along, and you know, there's no jealousy or anything, and so everyone just sort of gets along. But of course it's a dystopian, so there's more going on than it seems. But yeah, I also just thought these books were so clever growing up. I loved how each book ended and connected back to each other. That was a really great detail that was fun. And yeah, again, just a very action-packed series. It's kind of, if I'm in the mood for action, which I don't necessarily care much one way or the other about action in books very often. Obviously, I don't want books to be boring, but I don't necessarily seek out super action-packed books, but these ones definitely are, and are a super fun read. And now on to the top 3. Number 3 in the top 3 is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I love this book so much. Obviously, I feel like I've said that at the beginning of all of these books, but they are my top 10, so I do really love them all. But this one I really do. John Green is my favorite author. I love his writing style, and this is my favorite of his books. This is the book that got me into contemporary YA. I really didn't read a whole lot of contemporary YA before this. I was pretty exclusively just a fantasy person with like some dystopian mixed in, and every once in a while I would read YA, but just not very often. My main YA books before this one was The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And now I would say I probably read a little more YA than fantasy, so I'm probably mainly a YA person now. And of course most of my fantasy is fantasy YA. When I say YA, I mean contemporary. But yeah, this is one of those books that after I read it, I just wanted everyone to read it so that I could talk about it with everyone. It's funny because there's a line in the book where the main character talks about books that you want everyone to read, and for me that is definitely this book over any of my other books. And I actually did get my dad to read this book. I read it to him. This is the first book that I actually read aloud to him. I went on to continue reading books aloud to him after this, so this is also the book that briefly got him into listening to books. It was a nice way for us to bond. He often will be out in his garage working on cars and things, and so I would just come out and read to him, and this was the book that started it all. So it definitely holds a special place in my heart, and obviously is just such a tearjerker, and it's just such a lovely book. Getting down to the end, number 2 on my list, The Last Book in the Universe by Rodman Philbrick. This is one of the oldest books in my life. You can tell by like the taped up pages. It is so, I fear the day that the cover falls off. This is another dystopian. This is my favorite standalone dystopian. Uglies was my favorite dystopian series. This is, I think, basically the first book that I read after Harry Potter. Harry Potter was the first book that I kind of read on my own, and it's just a teeny little thing, so I've reread it literally countless times. I'm a big rereader, so I've actually reread all of these top 10 books multiple times. Sorry, Harry. But this one probably more than any other. This is kind of my go-to comfort read since it's nice and short. This is a book that I will often take with me traveling. So yeah, I just love this one so much. It takes place in a world that has been destroyed by a massive earthquake, and most of the world is run by gangs, except for this one small part of the world called Eden, where people who've been genetically improved live, and it's like a perfect place. And our main character lives out in kind of gangland, and he's gotten word that his foster sister is dying, and he's on a mission to see her one last time before she dies. And yeah, I just always loved this one growing up. It's a real book that loves books. It places a lot of importance on books, and it was kind of my intro into dystopian, which is a genre that I like a whole lot. And it's also just not a very well-known book. I have met very few people in my life who haven't read it or heard of it, and I feel like it deserves to be a little bit more well known. It's also kind of an older book at this point. But yeah, so if you like dystopian, this is one that you maybe haven't heard of, and so I would definitely recommend it. And then the final book on my list, my number one favorite book of all time, which you may already be able to guess, is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. These are the books that got me into reading. For the longest time, I almost exclusively read fantasy with, you know, some dystopian mixed in. There's just so much going on in this series that's all connected. J.K. Rowling is definitely very good at mysteries, which I don't like mystery as a genre very much, but within these books, it's really well done. And obviously, now that I'm older, I can see like all the plot holes and inconsistencies and stuff, but there's also lots of really great reveals and like things that are set up, you know, from the first book that don't pay off until the last book. There's just definitely so much detail and planning that went into these, even if it doesn't always quite work out. There are so many characters to love in this series. As I said early on, Hermione was kind of my one character before Kath that I could kind of be like, oh, we have this or that in common, even if we weren't totally similar. And yeah, just lots of nostalgia in this series. As I said at the beginning, a lot of these books are very nostalgic for me. A lot of them have been my favorites since childhood, and this is definitely the big one. So yeah, these are my top 10 favorite books of all time. Let me know down below what some of your favorite books are. And now to end the video off with a quote, I have one today from Lewis Carroll, who's obviously the author of Alice in Wonderland, and it goes, "Why sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.